stuff. First things first, participants will be muted in the session. So, if you're working from home and your dog sees a squirrel, don't worry too much because we won't even notice. We'll be recording this webinar for future viewing. Hopefully everybody saw the little pop-up and heard that chime. Nobody will be visible or audible on this session, so we're really only recording me and the slides that we're presenting. Number 3, since everyone is muted, please direct your questions to the question and answer box. We'll have some time to hit the questions at the end, but if something really important comes up along the way, we'll do our best to address it on the fly. I always feel like the best way to approach sessions like this is to kind of keep an open mind and go for the bounces when they come up. My coworker at PEC, Zhenya, is also monitoring the Q&A and will do his best to make sure I don't miss anything and nothing falls through the cracks. So thanks for joining this session. This is a follow-up session discussing the DCNR gap collection process using the Trail Implementation Manager tool, or the TIM tool. I'm going to put a link to the first session that we recorded that was explaining the process in a little bit more detail in the chat. Hopefully folks will be able to see it in just a minute. Of course, I'm juggling a few screens here, so that's always a fun challenge. There we go. The link to that recorded first webinar should be in the chat. This session is designed a little bit more to explain the actual functions of the tool, whereas the first session was kind of more about the process that we've employed getting to this point. But we're going to take a little bit of time either way just to kind of go through the process a little bit, just as a refresher, or for those folks who weren't able to attend the first webinar. We are really talking about the TIM today, and some of you may have heard about the TIM in one of the Greenways and Trails conference presentations, or maybe you've heard about it along the way. In short, the TIM is a crowdsourced platform for collaborative trail data management. This means that multiple stakeholders can all update trail data in the same space at the same time. This helps cut out some of the redundancy and some potential confusion that groups sometimes run into when you have to hunt through like a big email thread for answers, or if you're trying to send a document back and forth with 100 different edits. The TIM tool also has the potential to help groups create institutional memory. So if we see some turnover or folks jump ship and move on to some other projects, there's still this repository of information that new folks can draw upon. How did we even get to this step? Let's get back to this one point. I think everybody probably knows this one by heart, but let's go through it anyways. One of the 7 major recommendations of the 2020 to 2024 Pennsylvania Trail Plan is to close priority trail gaps in Pennsylvania's statewide trail network, with an overall goal of having a trail within 10 minutes of every Pennsylvania. In 2022, DCNR is implementing this recommendation by focusing on the identification of gaps or missing segments of trail. The immediate goal is to work with local trail providers to establish a spatial data set for gaps in trail systems across the state. This data is vital as the demand for trails continues to increase and funding programs continue to expand. The TIM tool can handle as many gap submissions as your organization would like to make. But I know some folks who I've talked to so far have a ton of gaps that they would like to submit. But the primary goal of this collection is really to get back to the priority trail gap designation. So if you're on the fence of what to include, focus on your most important, most pressing, and your highest value trail gaps. Keep that in mind. So PEC has been working with BRC, Bureau of Rec and Con, with DCNR to redevelop the TIM tool So it has a function of collecting this trail gap information. But there's a little bit of legwork that needs to happen, before groups can really update their gap information. So let's take a quick look just at this kind of quick flow on how this is really working. So we start with an intake form, which captures some basic data from trail groups, as well as hopefully the GIS line work for the gap in question. After the intake form is submitted, PEC works with our partners on the back end of the TIM tool at Environmental Planning and Design to set up an organization profile. That organization profile is attached to the different segments that your group is looking to submit. Once that is in place, we let you know, we'll shoot you an email saying, hey, your organization account has been created. You can now head into the TIM tool and create your user account. The user account is what an individual would use and sign up for in order to access and update their segment and gap profile information. The different users have possibly different levels of permissions in that not everyone has the ability to view and edit all segments. And this is something that we work with the folks who submitted the intake form to determine, just so we make sure that the right folks at the organization are the ones who can update their gap information. So once we have our user accounts created and you can log into the TIM tool, then you can head right in and update your gap details. And that's really what we're going to be looking at today. Once those gap details are in place, DCNR can use that information to evaluate the state of trail gaps throughout the Commonwealth and just have a better understanding of what the needs are for most trail groups. We also know that, while the TIM has the capability to pull in a ton of information, the real responsibility of submitting a gap and updating this information lies with the trail group. So we're putting a lot of this emphasis on you folks, but for good reason. Before we get too far into the details, and this is kind of a throwback to last session, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the intake form. So the intake form is a pretty important step in the process. Without this, we can't match segments to the organization, and then users would not be able to come in and match those segments as well with the ability to make some updates. One of the things that is really important to keep in mind with the form is that it has the ability to accept files. And the file information that we want the most is GPX line work. This is like really key because we're trying to do our best to help illustrate really like what the trail gaps represent. In the past, most of this information has just been on a map as point data, which is helpful, but doesn't really show the overall breadth of the gap in question or that trail groups are working on. So we're really making the big push to say, hey, please submit some actual line work so we can really develop and flesh out this map. In some cases, we know that putting any sort of line work on a map is a little bit of a sensitive process. Access to the tool is, for the most part, limited to approved users. But if there's any concern over that sensitivity, please just let me know. We will do our best to make sure that we find a way to represent your trail gap in a visual format that doesn't get anyone in trouble. That's the key here. If you have if you don't have a big background in GIS work, it's really not too much to worry about. I created a little video that is on the intake form at the bottom. You can link to it. And that video shows you how you can create and export a GPX file through probably the program that I use the most, which is Ride with GPS. I'm going to pull that up in just a minute here just so we can take a look. And I'm kind of doing this on the fly, so bear with me if it gets a little bit funky, but I'm hoping that right now everyone can see the screen where we have Ride with GPX open. This is a simple program that, once you create a basic account, you can draw some very simple lines that follow existing base mapping, or even go off the charts a little bit to create a piece. You can then save that segment, and it's pretty easy to view it and export it as well. I like doing this way because it's just simple. It's something I know, and it's a format that is kind of tried and true for me. If you click on export GPX file after you've had a chance to save your file, you can download that file and attach it to the intake form. Pretty simple stuff. But for the most part, that's really it. We had one question just pop up from Patricia, who asked, is GPX file the only accepted format? The answer is no. We'll take shape files if you work in ArcGIS or a similar program, as well as KML files or KMZ, one of those two. Pretty much, if you have something that we can put onto a map that shows where your trail gap is, send it in. What we're looking to avoid is having folks just send us a drawing or something on the back of a napkin, or another format that doesn't really translate well to an interactive mapping platform. I mentioned earlier that one of the things that we're looking to do with this tool is to provide BRC staff with the ability to evaluate the state of trail gaps throughout the Commonwealth. And this is really kind of what we're looking at. These are some of the top things that DCNR is looking to do with this information. Of these, I think number 4 is really right on the money: assist with statewide trail planning efforts to advance trails. That's really what we're looking to do here. And if we have a broader and more complete set of information related to this trail gap info that is sortable and it is visible in a more digestible format, that's definitely a good thing. So we're coming back to the TIM. Before I actually break into the TIM and we start doing some real-time looks at what the tool actually does, I just wanted to take a quick pause, and in the chat, I'm going to put the resources. If you have any questions too, now is probably a great time to just toss them in the chat or the Q&A box. Okay. So I'm putting the link for the intake form in the chat as well. I'm also going to put the link for the actual TIM tool in here too. And then finally, and I'll put this in a couple times, while I think we've gotten to a process and created a platform that's pretty user-friendly for the most part, I know that this is a process that is kind of new, and therefore it's a little bit funky for folks. And I'm happy to do basically anything possible to make sure that we get your information into the tool, submit it, and answer all your questions. So I'm putting my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me directly with any questions, and don't hesitate to pass any of this stuff along to your broader contact base or anyone else who's working on a trail gap in their neck of the woods. So I'm going to do a switch over and actually pull up the TIM tool in real time. And we're going to hope this works out pretty well. Okay, so we had one question come up in the Q&A at the moment as well. What factors are used to determine a priority trail gap? And I know Alex McDonald is on the call as well. I can let him answer that, but I'll also put a link to the priority trail gap map in the chat.
Hey, Chris.
Alex.
So I'm just getting on here. Okay, so we're answering the should gaps only be submitted for trails that the particular organization is responsible for developing. That was the question, right? That we're addressing.
Yeah, we've got that one popped up as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, did I miss?
No, so we actually had two, Alex. We had one that was just looking a little bit more for the definitions of what constitutes a priority trail gap. And I just took the link for the priority trail gap map and tossed that in the chat. And that definition is on the left pane of that map as well under further information. So that's a good place to access. That way you have it on hand just in case.
Yes, yes it is.
We had another one in the chat or in the question box, Alex, and you might be the best one for this too. Does the 10-minute goal mean 10 minutes by car or by walking or biking?
That's a good question. We actually have an analysis for both. So it's a little too hard to, we really weren't able to pick one. So essentially what general rule of thumb is, for maybe more urbanized and suburban areas, it's a 10-minute walk, and more rural areas is a 10-minute drive. That's been kind of the, what we've been working with. But we do have an analysis that we did in 2020 with the Trust for Public Land that actually gives us the real numbers on those 10-minute walks and 10-minute drives. And so we'll actually be expanding upon that over the next year or so, and trying to get more finite with that analysis. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that clarity, Alex. But going back to one last question we had in the chat for now, should gaps only be submitted for trails that the particular organization is responsible for developing?
Yeah, ideally that's absolutely what we're looking for. We want to keep the gap submissions with the organizations that are responsible for building and managing those trails. So, and I know that sometimes it gets a little complicated. You have larger trail systems that might have a municipality at the local level who's kind of building their own section. So I guess we're all going to have to sort of you'll probably just have to coordinate, like the Delaware and Lehigh trail is one that comes to mind, where there's a sort of an overarching organization who's trying to advocate and get funding to build the whole thing, yet it's owned and managed by a lot of local organizations and municipalities. So so some coordination on that end would be good. But it's really just whoever you guys decide is the best one to answer that really should be the one submitting that. We just don't want organizations who really have no business submitting gaps for on another organization's behalf. So so that's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Just expanding on that a little bit too, if this is a matter of, hey, I know that I work with a trail group and they don't have a lot of capacity to actually, learn how to use a new platform or fill out this information, definitely just get in touch with me directly. Already I've had a good couple of chats with folks who are, curious about how this is going to all pan out, and just have some, basic questions on how to use the tool. I'm always happy to run through this with pretty much anybody. And I love talking to people about, their trail projects. So it's kind of a win-win. Don't hesitate to connect the dots. All right, so I have the Tim login page up. I hope everybody can see this, and I'm going to make sure I've got my little mouse spotlight handy here. So for most folks, if this is your first time using the TIM tool, you've got a link at the bottom, and this links you right back to the intake form. So it's always there. If you didn't save it from this session, as long as you head over to the TIM, you'll have access to the intake form. Once you submit your intake form and we've built your organizational profile and you've gotten your email from me that says, hey, congratulations, we've got you in the TIM, then it's time to create your individual user account. And that's where we go down here to sign up. So we're really just looking for some basic username, password info that you create. Keep in mind that this is a pretty basic system. We are not looking for any super duper, unbreakable by anybody, passwords. Just think of something that you'll be able to remember and you can access the tool with. I know we've had some instances as well so far where folks believe they have created an account already, and maybe they haven't used it in a while and they can't remember some of their information. No big deal. I can generate an email from the TIM tool that sends you your username and password again, so you get a little refresher on what it actually is. Down here, we have the organization field, and this drop-down brings up a number of different organizations who have already created an intake form or that have been a part of a previous iteration of the TIM tool, which would be the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Manager or the Circuit Trails Pipeline. If you do not see your organization on this list, that means that either you haven't completed your intake form yet, or we're still in the process of creating that organization account for you within the tool. Okay. So let's say you've gotten through, you've created your account, you have your username and password. What does the tool actually look like when you get into it? I'm going to go ahead and use my login info here. The first step is that you see your dashboard or your project, my project hub is what we call it. It would be your project hub if you're looking at it, but basically it's just that dashboard that really shows you some of your most active and important segments that you are a primary stakeholder for. So we have a few on our PEC list here. Most of them are on the circuit side, but we have a few others. And one of them that we're going to pull up as an example is down here, the Sandy Creek Trail 322 crossing. So when we want to take a closer look at one of these segments from our project hub, we just click on the blue arrow right here, and it'll pull up the project profile. Project profile page has a few different tabs that we can keep in mind up here. The segment profile tab is really the one that has the real meat of the information. This has the segment ID, which is a number that is created on the back end just to help organize the segments. And then it has some other basic information. We've got the location, county, primary trail name, as well as the status, the trail type, the right-of-way control, and a few other bits and pieces. We also have an interactive map that's built into every segment profile. You can pan and zoom and all that fun stuff, and it allows you to do some basic measurement and change the base maps also. Below the map, you'll see a couple different things: project phase, right-of-way concerns, all of these good check boxes that can help you manage and paint the most accurate picture of the state of your trail gap. Up top, we have a couple different things. We have organizations. If you are the primary primary management organization for this particular segment, you can also add some other partners, stakeholders, and county and municipal partners also. Depending on the permission level that those folks have been granted and really how we update or how we attach them to the segment, they may be able to view some of the information in the segment profile, but for the most part, they will not have the ability to modify and make changes to the segment profile details. Each segment profile has a space to upload files as well. So if you have a detailed cost estimate, you can attach that to your specific gap. We also have action items. This one's probably not going to apply right now, but it's a good thing to keep in mind for the future. The one thing that I wanted to show using this example, though, was the DCNR Gap Info tab. In this case, we're going to click on the Gap Info tab, and we're going to see pretty much nothing. And that's because we don't have an organization that has filled out an intake form providing us with the necessary gap info to really get this built. So we don't have anything to attach to the segment or the line work on the map. So from here, we're going to check out a different example that kind of illustrates a little bit better what it looks like when we have the DCNR gap info matched to the segment profile. So I'm going to do this up here with Find a Trail. I'll do it by the map because that's kind of a fun way to go. And since I know which segment I'm looking for, I will zoom in and we'll check out this one right here. So this segment is Brookville to the Climax Tunnel. And I pulled this one up specifically because it represents a gap that is already finished. We see a lot of the same information, but on the DCNR Gap Info tab, we can click and actually have that populated with some more accurate information. We see the point on the map that corresponds with the line showing where the gap actually is. In this case, we would love to have this illustrated with another piece of line work rather than the dot. But we're also not going to worry too much about pulling in that segment gap info and line work from completed gaps. This example is much more consistent with what most users will see. They'll see both the segment profile with all the information here, as well as the DCNR gap profile based on the intake form. What we're asking users to do, and this is really like the meat of this process, is update both the information in the segment profile as well as the DCNR gap info profile tab as well. So that's going to allow our friends at BRC to get the most complete picture of really what the status of not only your trail gap segment might be, but all of the submitted trail gaps throughout the Commonwealth. So from this page, it's pretty simple to actually make these updates. There's a button over here where we go to edit the profile information. That brings up basically the same thing here. One note on this page is that there is a significance box right here that not all users will be able to see. This is a component that we built in on the back end. So as DCNR is helping to keep tabs on what this project actually means in the broader and more regional perspective, they can kind of do some free form entries using that box. So from this screen, all we need to do is hit this Modify Gap Details button. So this is really like opening the gate. You have to open the gate before you can change any of the details about the particular gap. And we really have the opportunity to change just about everything except for the gap number. And we want to be consistent, and most of this information right off the bat will be generated from your intake form. So the gap name and some of these other bits and pieces will be just pulled right over. But some of the other details, the overall description, and let's say, whether or not a new bridge is needed, as well as the cost estimate, are really going to be up to you to fill in. So as a trail group or trail organization, once you have this information up to date and you're feeling pretty comfortable with it, it's a pretty simple process. You just hit the Save Gap Details button. So you open it up by clicking that Modify button, change whatever you need to change, close it, and you're good to go. So overall, that is really what we're looking to have trail organizations do. It's a little bit of overhead learning how this process actually works, but it's really not too tough. And I want to pause just at this point to see if we have any specific questions about what we're asking folks to do, or really how this is going to shake out. So let's just take like a 5 count, and we'll do our pause for questions. Well, it doesn't look like we have a ton of questions, so this must be super clear, and it sounds like everyone's got a great handle on it so far. Or you're just taking a bite of your hoagie and can't really type and eat at the same time. We did have one question pop up. If a gap is completed, is there a way to remove the gap? That's a good question, and I think while I'm sure it's possible, we're leaning towards not removing it from the list overall, just because it kind of goes back to that institutional memory component of this. If we're using the tool to try to store this information over the long term, then there's still a benefit in keeping track of some of the closed gap information. Right, another question. Okay, so if a trail gap already has a number associated with it and no line work, do groups still need to fill out an intake form? So this is a tough one. It definitely makes it much easier on the back end for groups to fill out an intake form and attach the GIS, GPX file, any sort of line work to that intake form. But maybe you have a whole mess of gaps that you need to update. I will definitely accept that stuff if you just toss it in an email to me directly. I prefer it in an intake form, and each group, generally would need to fill out one intake form per gap that they would like to have considered for, in the tool. Along those lines, if you are a group that is managing a number of important gaps, and you don't always want to go through your project hub, feel free to poke around. You can find the trail segment that you're looking for by a number of different ways. I showed it off by map, but we can also do it by primary trail group, county, or status if you've already input that into your intake form. Another question just popped up. That's a good one to touch on. Is there a place to submit a supporting file in a PDF that would supplement the form to provide DCNR with additional data on associated plans, et cetera? That's a good question. I think the best place to do that is not really within the intake form or anything like that. And I think I'm understanding this correctly. We definitely want to keep line work in a usable GPX type format, but anything else that is a benefit to really explaining what the needs of a particular segment or gap might be can be uploaded to that particular trail segment. So let's go back in and we'll revisit, let's say the crossing at 322. So I know it's number 134. So from this project profile, let's go back to the Files tab. So the Files tab allows you to upload pretty much anything. Yeah, basically. We haven't really come across any sort of file format that doesn't play nicely with this. This is really just like a repository for files related to that segment. So, in the beta testing of this, we've kind of done this already. We've had some folks just upload images of what a site looks like. So you have a slightly better idea of what the on-the-ground conditions are, as well as things like val map scans, or if it's been part of a relevant county or regional plan. That's a great place to put all this information. That being said, we don't really have a great way to sort all that information when it's in the File tab. But we have learned throughout the years that, being able to match up documents related to a particular trail project or a particular segment is a huge benefit. So once again, instead of having to send files back and forth or try to navigate through Dropbox or something along those lines, the benefit here is that we are matching those files with some of the mapping and the details related to that particular segment. So hopefully we hit on that question and we answered it. Thanks again. I wanted to move into maybe like one or two more quick things while we have folks. One of them is going to be reports. So since the TIM tool is really kind of a combination between a GIS platform as well as just a working database, we have the ability to generate some reports based on specific criteria. This function at this point might not be super useful to all users, but this is one of the things that we see beneficial to BRC staff when it comes time to review gaps. So we think it's kind of worth discussing anyways at the moment. So for example, we can choose a specific criteria from our reports, and let's say we want to see all the gaps that have a let's see, in progress right of way. So we can quickly pull up all of the segments that have marked right of way as in progress. So if we're really trying to get a good idea about, what trail segments are hitting hurdles with, railroad right of way, or maybe we want to know all the trail segments that are, having the hurdle of dealing with invasive species. That's something that we are looking to provide so we can better kind of organize some of the information that we have based on either challenge or based on opportunity. From this list, we also have the opportunity to export all this as a CSV file or just print it out wholesale. So in general, that's really what I wanted to go through for this quick session. I think we've got a few minutes left, so hopefully folks can finish their lunch. But before we really adjourn, I wanted to just discuss future phases. So PEC worked with a couple different organizations, mostly in the Southeast as well as the Western side of the state, to help build these tools as a good spot to address the needs for managing trail information. We're asking users at this point really to just submit their gap information, which is great, but we're hoping in the future to be able to expand what we offer trail groups to also include incorporating their broader trail information. So let's take a quick look at the map. And we can see that we really have information on the western side, basically from Pittsburgh to Erie, and this section out here into the north central area for the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail, as well as this PA Wilds Loop. This is information that was pulled into the tool based on some work that PEC did for a report looking at these gaps a couple of years ago. So we already had this level of trail corridor segmented in this way, and it really translated pretty easily into the tool. This is something that we're hoping to do in the long term with other trail groups, but we're not quite there yet as far as capacity. We want to make sure that we've kind of nailed this down on how we expect users to interact with the tool. But generally, we see this as a potential way that all trail groups throughout the state can use the same platform to organize and collaborate on developing trail data management. It comes up pretty regularly. So if we have a meeting with the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Alliance, we've found it useful to have this level of mapping so that folks up here in maybe core EPA who aren't super familiar with what's happening down in Allegheny County can have a better idea of, where these trail segments sit in relationship to one another, and, what similar challenges or approaches they can use to help develop their trail more efficiently. All right, so that's really where we are with things. I hope that was a quick look at this stuff without being too detailed. I'll leave it open for another few minutes for questions, but otherwise, I thank everyone for joining us. I encourage everybody to go ahead and fill out your intake forms. And if one thing that I will press upon this group who has attended this session to do is to go ahead and pass this information out as far as possible. I've been sending some info out, getting it out to some of my local and more close by contacts, and will continue to do so. I'll also be happy to have a one-on-one, discussion or walkthrough with your trail organization, if we think that's necessary. So we're here to help make sure we get this information in there, and don't hesitate to reach out with questions, concerns, ideas, all that good stuff. Since I'm not seeing any questions, I think everybody's good to go. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.